can follow us on Twitter at mmercado2333. Like the radio show on Facebook at Outreach Radio Chicago. We're on YouTube. If you missed anything, just go to YouTube/MikeMercado2333. And we have the brand new website, mercadoairwaves.wordpress.com, if you want to see all the other cool stuff that we are doing, along with all the cool pictures we're posting on Instagram at MikeMercado2333. On today's show, we have a very, very special guest. It's going to be a really cool conversation. Joining us today, we are very proud to have the two-time Grammy-nominated musician, Mr. David Young. Mr. Young, how are you doing today? Thank you for joining us on Outreach Radio Chicago.
Well, it's nice to be with you, Mr. Mercado.
This show came down the wire, and one thing that just caught my attention is the combination of music and spirituality. Can you just tell us a little bit about how this whole thing came together?
Well, I've been playing the recorder. It's like a Renaissance flute. I play all different sizes of them, and I sold millions of CDs, and, healers and all kinds of hospitals and healing centers have used my music for about 20 years. And about 2 years ago, I started doing these meditation events because I've been meditating for 33 years at this point. And when I started doing these events, I was hoping that people would experience some of the inner peace that I had experienced during meditation, and that I put that peace into my flute music. I play two flutes at one time, and I accompany my flutes either with harps or guitars or keyboards. And I've recorded 59 different CDs. And 2 years ago, when I started doing these events, I was just hoping, like I said, that people would relax and find some inner peace, maybe see that purple light that I see when I'm meditating. Sometimes I see a little star. And I was just incredibly surprised and amazed that people started sharing that they had a conversation or a spiritual travel with their favorite grandmother or grandfather or a friend from childhood or a mom or a son. I couldn't believe it. I could believe it. It was just such a shock to my ears because I had no idea that this was possible. Because after all the years I was meditating, I never had an experience like that myself.
Mm-hmm.
And the details that people had shared with me, like one woman, her husband died in 9/11. And so it had been, I think it was 12 years at that point when she came to my event. And she explained that she was like just allowing herself to travel and float with my music, and she found herself in this heavenly, beautiful place. And her husband was there, and he was smiling, he was happy. He told her not to worry about her anymore because he's in a beautiful place, he's in peace, and that he loved her, and just enjoy your life as much as you can. Can you imagine hearing that and sitting in front of the room and trying not to look blown away and surprised that
Right.
this woman just shared that,
You have all this success in your career, and typically people who hit that type of level have such a focus and such a drive. When something like this happens, what ends up being more rewarding?
Well, that's a really great question. The truth is that the fact that, like, every day about 300,000 people are listening to my music and meditating to it, finding peace in it, that's worth more than any Grammy nomination, because that's a Grammy nomination it's more about popularity as far as whoever wins the Grammy. And that's really not as important to me as the fact that my music has a healing place in people's lives, and just for the record, man, my career has, like anybody who has a career in entertainment, and actually, I think everybody who's even in business, you have your ups and your downs in your careers. I started this with my last $100 in 1990 at Venice Beach. Playing music on the beach. I was 30 years old. I was broke. I was in trouble, and I started to play this flute music. I had a duo with a woman who played the harp, and the duo was called Celestial Winds. And we started with nothing. And, after 3 years of working together, we had sold 100,000 CDs together.
Wow.
All these amazing things happened. And then, I stopped calling my music Celestial Winds, and I just used my name, which is David Young. And So I just kept building it. And, you listen to people and they tell you why they're buying their music. I had thousands of people who would come up to my booth and say, I'm a massage therapist. It sounds like all this music is perfect for massage. And I would say, yeah, everything that I make here is perfect for massage. And so then I started exhibiting at the massage therapy conventions, at the spa conventions, the anti-aging conventions. I was the only musician at these national shows. Some of them were international shows. I was the only guy who had spiritual music at these shows for 7 years. It was like amazing. It was having the right thing at the right time. And when I first started doing it in 1990, there was no such genre as new age music or spiritual music. It was ahead of the curve just because, I made this music because it made me feel good and it made other people feel good, and it afforded me to make enough money to survive back then at Venice Beach. And, then I sold 1 million CDs, and it was an incredible time in my life. But then, the economy crashed in about 10 years ago, and then the digital age started, and it was an incredibly scary time in my life because, man, I got used to having a very successful career for like 15 years. You get used to a certain lifestyle, and then my whole future or whatever I thought was any security that I had in my career, when the economy crashed, I was in a serious place because it looked like music was just going to be free. Can you make a living in music if music is free? So I made it through that really, really terrible, difficult time. And one of the things that I started doing was I started doing these meditation events. And they originally were called soul activation events because people at the events were sharing that it was like their soul was being woken up or activated in a way that they had never experienced it before. And whether somebody was meditating for 3 months or 30 years, people all described the same thing. And so about the first 100 events that I did, they were under that name, soul activation events. Then I got a new publicist about a year ago, and so much of what I do is connected to this thing that's called the Ascension. 2012, the end of the Mayan calendar, there was a whole awakening that was happening on the planet that, there were lots of people like me who were meditating 20, 30 years ago. When I say lots of people, I knew people. But as far as the percentage of the world that was meditating and doing yoga 30 years ago, it was very small.
Yeah.
But now at this point, there's over 50 million Americans meditating or doing yoga every week. That's just in America. There's never been a period of history on this planet when there were 50 million people on the planet meditating, pursuing their spirituality. And so we're in this incredible time, People talk about the different changes in the world, and, there's always going to be good things, always going to be bad things that are going to be happening in the world. But we've never had this much positive energy that's been generated by mankind, ever.
That's so interesting.
Whenever anybody tells you about Atlantis or Moria or these other places, there wasn't the concentration of that many millions of people for meditating and doing spirituality. There were spiritual people back in those time periods, but the sheer numbers is just amazing. And one of the things that I just found out, I performed at the International Association of Near-Death Studies. The acronym for it is IANDS. I performed at their national convention about 3 weeks ago in Orlando. And one of the things that I found over the last 2 years of doing my events is that 80% of the people who come to my events will have a spiritual experience where they'll have a conversation or spiritual travel with one of their loved ones or with one of the ascended masters or one of the archangels, But I've noticed that 100% of the people who have had near-death experiences share one of those experiences at the event. It's like right across the board. And I got to find out an amazing statistic that I'd like to share with you. Over the last 35 years since this organization, that's a support group for people who have had near-death experiences before, would you like to guess how many people have had documented near-death experiences over the last 35 years that were documented, doctor or their nurse? You want to just take a wild guess?
Let's say 8,000 people.
Okay, well, you're pretty close. It's actually 20 million people. 20 million Americans who look just like you guys out there in Radio Land, have had an experience that they didn't expect.
Wow.
And so many of those people describe the exact same thing of what happened. They were in a car accident that before the impact, they saw themselves above the car, looking down like they were watching a movie. They were completely disconnected from their physical body because they were from the viewpoint or the part of their beingness that you could call your soul or your higher self. And they watch this event happening like they're watching somebody else. And then they find themselves flying, and they feel themselves flying at a high speed through this tunnel. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. The closer they get to the light, the more euphoric the feeling gets. And then when they finally get to the tunnel, to the end of the tunnel, and they get to that light, and they realize they're in heaven, they think, wow, if I'm in heaven now, I wonder if I'm going to see my grandmother. And instantly, their grandmother walks up.
Wow.
Or they might describe, wow, if I'm in heaven right now, I wonder if I'm going to see Buddha or Jesus. And instantly, Buddha or Jesus walk up. Now, of those 20 million Americans who've had the near-death experiences, 7,000 of those people have agreed to go under hypnosis. So this way people could connect with their subconscious and see what did they actually experience in their near-death experience when they got to heaven. And all 7,000 people described the same thing that I just said to you. Now, the thing is that here in this earthly world, we have this, the good, bad thing about this earthly world is that we have this thing called a logical mind. So we use this logical mind for the obvious things, right? But one of the things that all the scientists around the world agree on is that we're only using 2% of our actual brain.
Wow.
What we consider our complete intelligence, what we associate our intellect with, is only 2% of our actual brain. So how do we access that other 98%? Well, Albert Einstein talked about it, and he said that the most important part of ourself is our imagination. Now, as adults, we have been taught that our imagination is anything but important, So what actually happens, the typical story for every single one of us, at least up until this period of time, it's changing now, but, you go back the last 100 years, the last 1,000 years, we are reincarnated into this little baby's body. And if you've ever seen the look of amazement and utter joy in the eyes of a newborn baby, it's because that baby has just spent the last 20 to 50 years of earth time in heaven. Okay? And now, because it's new in this body, it can go back and forth between heaven and that little body very easily. And do you know why it can do that? Because nobody has convinced them that they can't. And so when we're 2 years old and 4 years old and 6 years old, we go on these amazing journeys inside our minds. And we have guardian angels, and we have angels. And, if you saw that movie of Heaven is for Real. So this little boy has a near-death experience when he's about 5 years old. He never knew that he had an older sister who died before he was born. And in his near-death experience, he went to heaven, and his sister, who had died years before he was born, met him in heaven. So he's in a coma, I think, for a week. He comes out of the coma, comes back into his physical body, and he tells his parents, Mom, Dad, I just met my sister in heaven. The mom and dad had never told him that he had an older sister who died before he was born. Now, if you heard 7,000 stories like this, at what point do you believe it? Because how could these things happen if they weren't really true? I've had people come to my events who got to meet their great-grandfather that was never even alive during their lifetime. I've had people who were adopted, and their original biological parent had died, in the last 10 or 15 years, and they never met their biological parents while they were alive. And they got to experience and reconnect, and they got to share, that, hey, this was, all I was supposed to do was bring you into the earth in this lifetime, and that was my soul contract. That was the only thing I was supposed to do. There was another woman who came to an event in Richmond, Virginia, that I did last year, and she has a son that has Down syndrome, and his, what he lives with, he can't speak, he can't communicate. In the meditation, she found herself in the spiritual dimension, and her son met her in the spiritual dimension, and in that pure form, as his soul, he was able to tell her that why he reincarnated into this lifetime with Down syndrome.
David Young joins us today on Outreach Radio Chicago. Really fast, I want to make sure we get a couple plugs in here. You can go to davidyoungmusic.com. Go to Facebook /DavidYoungMusic 2015. Also, for some song examples, go to davidyoungmusic.com /audio/TRKO2.M3U for a specific track. And if you want any of these testimonials, just go to vimeo.com/17982233. We'll have links to all this when the video goes up onto YouTube. David Young is going to be with us for a few more moments. And one thing I really want to hit is, you've gone and given us this great testimony. You've given us what you've experienced. But before all this happened, so we could address some of the skeptics or anybody who's interested in this, doesn't necessarily believe all of it, I want them to get an idea of when it first hit you that your music had this type of impact. And in general, when you realized as an entertainer how powerful some of these forms of entertainment are, specifically music, because for some reason music is primal to us humans. Like, it's just embedded deep inside of us. What makes you think, or what do you think is it that triggers that spirituality to come out of somebody? And specifically your work, is it something that maybe comes out from you from the highs and lows, or your belief?
So many different answers for some of those questions. I was so freaking surprised. I was the biggest skeptic in the world about communicating with people in the heavenly dimension. There's nobody listening out there who was a bigger skeptic than I was. I just completely didn't believe that was possible. And so the very first event that I did, where 5 people shared reconnecting with their moms or grandmothers or grandfathers or something like that, that was a mind blower. So after about 6 months of that, I got used to it, because every single event I did, people shared that. This was without me thinking about that happening while I was playing. I played 2 flutes at one time. I was playing the most beautiful music that I could, trying to uplift the vibration and the energy in the room as much as I could, just by playing as beautifully as I could, And after about 6 months of that, something happened that just completely took it up to a whole nother level of, you could say it's unbelievable, believable, incredible, whatever. But there were 3 people at one event who all described seeing Jesus standing in the same spot in the room. Now, as far as my mind was stretched with 6 months of people telling me that they connected with their grandmothers and grandfathers, or, their loved ones, I never expected that to happen.
Right.
Because I grew up in a Jewish family, number one, and I didn't even know what to think about.
Oh, wow.
About
Okay.
that,
Yeah.
And so I called up a professional channeler. His name is Bob Murray. He died last year, but for 2 years he channeled for me to help explain all of these things that were happening spiritually, because right now channeling is very popular. Everybody knows what channeling is, but just 2-3 years ago, nobody was talking about it. And if you did talk about it, was not really accepted.
Yeah, you were shunned.
So, well, people just weren't comfortable talking about it, because nobody had really talked about that. But it was all part of the ascension, because part of the ascension is the reality that we live our next life after this physical body stops working. You know, when it's not like this physical body stops and it's the end of the movie. No, it's just a transition into a movie in a different movie theater in the heavenly dimension. It's just as real as this dimension, except in the physical dimension we have cells and atoms and these things that are made out of matter, where in the spiritual dimension our cells and atoms are made out of light. They're not made out of this physical thing. So I asked Bob, I mean, can you channel Jesus for me? Because I don't really know how to wrap my mind around the fact that 3 people saw him at the event last night. You know, I didn't see his name on the list of people who were coming to the event, so it was really it was a surprise. You know, so he says, well, I can't guarantee anything, but you know, I can try to connect with him. So after about a minute of silence on the phone, he says, okay, I've connected with Jesus. What do you want to ask him? I'm thinking, oh my God, what am I going to ask about what I was going to ask him, you know? So I said, you know, this is really strange for me, having a conversation with you, because I grew up Jewish. And he says, well, I can understand that. I grew up Jewish also. I mean, I swear to God, this is what he started the conversation with, you know? And I said, well, I don't know what to believe about what I've heard about you, and I don't know what not to believe about what I've heard about you, you know? You know, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I'm not really sure, how do I approach having this conversation, you know? And I said, could you tell me a little bit about yourself? Because I don't know what to believe about what I've heard about you and what not to believe. And he started out saying that I don't like pedestals. He says, when people put others up on pedestals, the only thing they get is a stiff neck. And that made me chuckle a little bit, like I heard you laugh a little bit, because that was funny, you know. And you know what they say, the best comedians are Jewish, you know.
Yeah, there you go.
And so the second thing he said was, I don't like rituals. When people do rituals, they think they're getting closer to God, but they're actually getting further away from God because it's so mechanical. There's no love involved. There's no feeling, or your heart is not opening to it because you're really just doing something repeatedly, mechanically, you know. And at first I thought he was talking about the Catholic Church, but then the more I thought about it, every religion has got rituals that people do over and over again. And then the third thing he said was really a shock, because I never, ever expected, I just never thought that Jesus would say something like this, you know. He said, I did not create Christianity. I thought, man, is that a soundbite? Well, a couple of weeks later, I was sharing the exact thing that I just said to you guys with a friend of mine. And as fate would have it, she had just read a book that a woman wrote, supposedly channeled Jesus in this book. And when I told her these things that I just said to you guys, she said those exact words were in this book. I think they call that a validation.
David Young, we're running out of time. I think this is a perfect place to stop. What we're going to do is we're going to set up another interview, and we're going to continue on. Before I let you go, there's something I really want to get up there just in case anybody who's been listening is interested, or at the very least just wants to do a little bit of research on what's going on and what David has. When is the next Soul Ascension meditation workshop happening? Where is it at? And how can anybody get in touch with you guys if they want to go ahead and join this?
Okay, on September 2nd, I'm at the Creative Life Center in Sedona. I'm in Los Angeles now, and then I fly to Sedona this weekend, and then on September 4th, I'm at the Unity Church in Sedona. And then after that, I have 4 events that are in Tucson or Phoenix, Arizona, and then I have 6 events that are in Miami after that. But the easiest thing to do is just go to my website, because all the events are listed on the website. All those different videos that you were talking about earlier, those links are right on my website. So if you didn't catch the numbers, and don't worry about it, just go to my website, and you can click on the links. You can hear what other people have experienced at the workshops. And I just want to tell you guys, listening out there, is that just open your mind a little bit. Just allow your logical mind to take a back seat and just find some beautiful music to listen to. Go into meditation and allow yourself to just drift with the music and just be open, because there's no barrier between your spiritual self and your physical self. And, you know, all of the ascended masters, Buddha and Kuan Yin and Mother Mary, all of them, they're all working together. And whichever one is the right one to connect with you, they will connect with you. And just believe it when you experience it. Don't allow your skeptical, logical mind to get in the way of what is really the most awesome thing you could ever experience, to know that you exist and will exist after this physical body stops working, and that you're always connected to that heavenly dimension.
Please visit davidyoungmusic.com. I cannot wait to talk some more about this amazing stuff with you.
Yeah, I'd love to.
David Young, everybody, and we'll be right back on Outreach Radio Chicago. One last thank you to David Young for joining us today on Outreach Radio Chicago. If you would like to know more, please visit davidyoungmusic.com. You can actually see testimonial and sample some of the audio that we were talking about. Also, go to Facebook and like David's page at facebook.com/davidyoungmusic2015. That'll do it for us, guys. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Outreach Radio Chicago. I'm everywhere in the universe. You can follow me on Twitter at mmercado2333. Subscribe to us on YouTube if you missed any past show on YouTube/MikeMercado2333. We're also on Instagram. You can follow us to see what we're doing pre and post show. Just follow me on Instagram at MikeMercado2333. Also, go to the website, mercadoairwaves.wordpress.com. There you will find all the links to all the cool videos and interviews on top of Outreach Radio Chicago. Thank you again to David Young. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time on Outreach Radio Chicago.